What's up, everyone? Today we have some pretty poor quality audio and sound for you, but it's because we're back home because of the pandemic and we're in another lockdown here in the UK. So there you go. But it doesn't stop us making videos. Today I'm going to run through the questions that you guys gave me on Instagram, and I'm going to make a video out of it. Production tips, the most asked questions all into one video. So we're going to go through chord progressions, mixing tips, mastering tips, sound design tips, and live instruments, mixing live instruments with synths. So let's just get right into it. All right, so let's start out with chord progressions. So first of all, I've just made this really quick chord progression and I've made it as basic as possible. It's literally just triads, and we're going to spice it up, make it sound better, smoother, more interesting, a little bit jazzy in places. But yeah, let's listen to it. So yeah, it's pretty boring. I think first things first that I usually do is I grab all of the root notes of the chord and I copy them down an octave. And you can also go down another one sometimes depending on what key you're in. So already it sounds way fuller, way more full, however you say it. The main thing here that I would do first is I can see visually and I can hear that this chord progression is jumping about a lot. And there is ways that we can fix this, and this is by using inversions. So it might sound like a crazy term when you're working with it on a piano. It's also just another way for the player to be able to play something more smoothly and not have to jump around the keyboard like this. But it also just sounds way better, and in the MIDI window you'll be able to see it super clearly. So first of all, I'm going to try and find what like the common tone is in these chords. I can see straight away that these two share the E, so let's try dropping this down an octave. If you're in Logic, you can just go Alt Shift and then the down arrow or the up arrow to move in between octaves. Here we go, like already that can probably go up one, and I can see that that's gone up a semitone above the E, so we're on the F. So I'm going to take that back down and we can turn this chord into a major 7 chord if we just take this up an octave and drop it down. Yeah, that's an F major 7, as you can see here as well in Logic. Can already hear that sounds much smoother. We've also got this note here, which yeah, we can take that up an octave, and then we could even try adding the E in as well. So there we go, you've got like a D sus D7 sus2 chord there. Don't be frightened by the names of the chords, because you know you can have a chord that sounds good and it just has the craziest name ever. Don't know why. I'm not completely knowledgeable in this sort of stuff. I just kind of do it by ear and I kind of have a basic understanding of it. So just go along with me here. So here we've got this one. This can probably go down. But again, because these are all kind of major sevenths and sus chords and whatever, we can probably add another note into this one as well. Sometimes I'll just copy, kind of imitate what the other chords are doing and see if it sounds good. If it doesn't, I'll change it. Sounds interesting. So that's a C add 9. That's an interesting chord. See what it sounds like though. I'm not a fan of that. So I'm kind of just using a bit of trial and error here. I think I'm going to settle on that for now. So that's a C6. It's just adding in the 6th there. And then here already that can go. Actually, let's keep that down there and add the E back in. That makes it a 7th again. F major 7, and that's a G6. Okay, let's have a listen to what we've just done. Okay, I'm still not keen on this one. I reckon we just go with that. Okay, the next step that I usually take is I kind of figure out what key we're in. So I know we're absolutely in a minor key. We're in A minor. If we're in a minor key, something you can always experiment with is borrowing major chords that are not diatonic to the key, meaning they're not actually in A minor. We're just borrowing them. And you can kind of, if you don't really know much about this and you don't really know where to start, the easiest thing to do is just find the minor chords and just sharpen the minor third, so you get a major third. So I know this is going to work already, just because I know that when you can borrow the major tonic from a minor key, and it usually sounds interesting. So let's just give this a listen anyway. Hear it loop back around. See, it's got more of that like euphoric, mysterious feeling to it. I do this a lot. I think I use this in Caught in the Rays and Keep Me Awake, this technique. Another thing we can do, and this is what I usually do when I'm borrowing the major tonic or any major key chord, I add the 9th in on the major chord, and that you can just do that by doing that, going down 2 from the major. That's the 9th, but just an octave lower. I'm just going to remove the root note there because we don't necessarily need it. It just sounds more magical. So really quickly, just to show you the difference between what we started with and what we have now. And then we ended up with this. It's crazy. So yeah, that's kind of the way that I approach chord progressions. There's also a kind of few other tips I'll just mention quickly. If you're kind of getting into it and you really want to, you know, learn new interesting chord progressions from your favorite songs or whatever, just search the chords online and literally be like, you know, what chords does this Daft Punk tune have, and learn it, like dissect it and understand why it sounds good to you. But yeah, let's move on. Rightio, so what we're going to move on to talking about now is more the sound design process, and so many of you asked about this. Which is funny because when I'm producing, I don't necessarily actively go and sound design things as some producers do. The way that I kind of produce is all just as I go along with it. It just happens, and then I kind of dissect it as I go back. So I think kind of the main thing that I focus on when I'm sound designing is just really just messing about with stuff, screwing it up, breaking the rules, doing weird stuff that shouldn't happen, and then cleaning it up after. So, for example, this main sound here is a cool, like, weird organy sound, but very electronic. So if I take off all the processing, you get this. So all that's going on here is I've got this main bass sound, which in itself is quite cool. But if I take even the processing off this, it's just a saw wave. And this is something that I really want to kind of speak about, is that a lot of the sounds that I use in my songs are based off the most simple, basic building blocks of square wave, saw wave, whatever. So this is literally the init patch in Serum. It's literally the init patch with a bit of noise. That's it. And then it's going through isotope trash, and that's what's making it sound like that. And then this top sound here is playing the harmony of this bass. It's not playing the same notes, and it's also an octave higher with no processing. It's the init sound on the Juno. It's literally just a saw wave again, but just from a different synth, a little bit of noise. And then I'm running it through Decapitator just to give it a bit of distortion and volume. I'm just getting rid of the low end because the bass is definitely covering that. And then some sidechain, and I'm also using a sample delay just so that there's no weird phasing going on between these two sounds, because they are both saw waves. And then we get that. It sounds okay, it's a bit boring. So I grouped them together, and this is a technique I use a lot, is when you group stuff together and then you distort it together, it squashes the sounds together, and then you get this massive grittiness. And I'm literally just using Camel Crusher for that. You can use any distortion. And then after that, I'm just running it through an EQ, getting rid of the low end, because I've actually got a bass that's covering the low end, so we don't need that. And then finally, it's the rotor cabinet. And then I just go through and mess about with the rotor cabinet. So we're using this gig rig preset here. We can use anything. They all give slightly different sounds. This one just kind of has more movement to it. And then the main thing I noticed here was, obviously it sounds sick, but all the high end's just gone. So I bounced out this before it. So this is just bouncing it out before it's gone through the bus. So I have to add the distortion back in, EQ it again. This time, just keeping the high end in, because that's all we need. And then I'm adding this tremolo to it. And what this does is this is it without the tremolo. This is it with. It's a really, 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 really fast tremolo. The smoothing's all the way up so it doesn't sound too jaggedy. And I've taken the depth down a little bit. And it just kind of sounds like it's distorting even more because the sound's jumping up and down in volume really fast. And then I'm running it through this primal tap, which is a chorus type thing. Makes it wide. Even wider with another sample delay. Just so it's really out here and away from the original sound. So I didn't want it to... I didn't want any phasing or anything going on when these two were playing together. And this is what you get in the end. This super nice, high, rich lead chord sound. Then in my kind of process of working, I'll instantly move on to layering that and making it sound bigger, because it sounds quite thin on its own. So straight up, add a bass underneath. And then, you know, I'm thinking, what's this sound missing? Kind of some big, airy chords that are going to fill out the top end. So it's just like a hyper saw, super saw layer. This distorted piano sound, this weird sound from Gladiator, and then together you get that. There's even this sound here, which has just got a filter on it, and together those are, and then you add in the lead sound and you get this huge sound, which is just combined of loads of different things put together in a weird, like, strange, creative way. And if you kind of think like that, you're always going to get, like, unique sounds, because you're just doing stuff that other people aren't doing, but you're cleaning it up afterwards. And then, like, even moving on, what else we got in here? And this track was literally a complete accident. Like, I kind of stumbled across it whilst just messing around with different sounds. I had this, like, vocal chop thing going on. And that was playing in the breaks as like this atmospheric kind of filler thing. And then I was like, all right, let's just chuck it into the drop and see what happens. And I just chopped it up kind of with the volume automation and just literally introduced a side chain, and it sounds like this. That wasn't me actively thinking, right, I'm going to add in this weird vocal chop into this track. This is just me stumbling across it, and it just fits. And then kind of I just play on that. So we've got this kind of do type rhythm. That's why these chords up here are being filtered, to kind of mimic that and just represent that idea and just strengthen it, so it's not just some random thing, and you kind of have everything working together in the end. That's kind of the aim that I go for. You got these chords also doing the same kind of thing, and then the bass is just kind of filling the gaps. That's kind of the gist of the main sounds. And then we've got this bass here, which is just a sound that I use a lot. It sounds like an electric bass, but it's got more like sub and kind of consistency to it, which is why I use it in drops a lot. I'm just screwing with it here. Like I was like, let's just add a bit crusher because it will just help it poke through the mix. And it really is, like, for me, sound design is a lot in the process of processing and adding plugins and things that shouldn't be there. And it's also about the order of your chain as well. So, you know, right here I've got a huge boost in the EQ of like 10 decibels before I'm running it through the Camel Crusher to compress it, and that's how you get that kind of live bass sound from it. It's just being mindful with those little bits. What else have we got? There's some weird little bass sound here which fills this gap here. So let's run through that. This is a prime example of just messing about and just stumbling across something that sounds okay. So I knew I wanted something to fill that gap, so I thought, okay, let's something with a long attack. So I just brought up the ES2, trusty ES2, beautiful synth, and I just screwed around in here. So I originally just had a square wave with like 12 voices and just detuned them from each other so it's big and wide. And when you choose a square wave, it just sounds a little bit more interesting sometimes when you've got loads of saw wave stuff going on. And then there's a saw wave on top of that in this oscillator, but it's just playing the third but 2 octaves up, so it sounds like this together. Again, then those two are being distorted even with white noise as well, and that's why it sounds all nasty. And then it's obviously running through a filter just to kind of get that sound. And then to make it more interesting, I'm literally just automating the pitch. So even just little things like this can give you a weird sound in a way. Like without the pitch automation, it sounds like this. A little bit flat, you know. The pitch automation just spices it up. And then that on its own sounds like this. It works, but you kind of want to imitate what's going on there and just kind of layer it up. So instantly I'm thinking, what is this sound doing? Like, what does it sound like to me? It almost sounds like someone's, like the sound of like a zip on a jacket or something. I mean, here, this is what I've done. It sounds like paper tearing. And then you have this. So I'm just chucking in the sound of like ripping a green pepper. Who would have thought? I mean, and then I'm just compressing it because I want it to fit with the bass, and like this compressor just slams everything, which is kind of the intention there, is to just make sure that it fits in with the bass because it's such a powerful sound. And then I'm just widening it with the sample delay. It's super subtle, but when it's in the mix, it just elevates the idea of what was there with the bass and helps the listener kind of understand what's actually going on there. And then on top of that, I have no idea what this is, so let's run through this. It looks like it's pretty much the same sound, just copied down. Okay. But it's obviously playing a different note to just kind of get that higher frequency information. Running through the same distortion thing. But the thing that's going on here is there's a ring shifter, and this is another plugin that gives you like crazy weird sounds if you mess around with it. Without. with. So yeah, you can play around with that and you get some weird stuff. There's a different kind of tremolo on this, giving that super fast ducking again. And the reason I would have done this is to kind of keep it out of the way of that main bass sound a little bit. And then together. And then down here, we've just got like this little reverse crash. Again, everything kind of doing its own thing, but they're all complementing each other in a way. And that's kind of my tip for sound design, really. Right, so since we're in this project, which is completely new, I thought let's use the opportunity to show you guys how I master my stuff, because there's no master on this yet. Just a heads up that I'm literally no crazy mastering engineer at all. It's not my forte, and a lot of the time when it comes to like my more commercial singles with vocals on and stuff, I prefer someone else to master them. But yeah, let me show you my process anyway. At the moment, this track's already like, the mix is kind of there in a way. Like it would be there enough in a way for me to go and chuck a master on. I usually produce with an OTT already on the master. Reason being is it kind of helps me to get a sense of what the production would sound like a little bit more glued together. A lot of people do say don't use OTT on your master, but I just do it because in my opinion it sounds good. So I guess there's no rules there. But let's go in and let's start off by making sure we've got enough headroom. So I add like a gain plugin onto the master first of all. To be honest with you, there's already a decent amount, so I'll just go in straight away and I'll add an EQ. And the reason that I'm adding this EQ is not to add any frequencies, is to just remove the really unnecessary low and high information that we can't hear. So around about like here, and then kind of around like 20ish. You know, it's not, I'm only really getting rid of a bit of it. And then I usually go and put it in linear phase mode. And then it kind of depends what I'll do next. I usually go and, what should we go for? Let's go with like the PSP. And I have this preset that I kind of work from. It's already adding like so much volume, so I just kind of take the drive down a little bit, the mix and the output a little bit. And then obviously we're going to be clipping on our master. I'm going to add the glue. And then I put the release like really quick and the attack way up. And then I'm kind of aiming for about 4 decibels of gain reduction, really. And then I kind of add a little bit back in of what I've lost. You really don't want to add too much makeup gain. And then I'll add the OTT usually. And then usually just chuck a limiter on at the end. And then I've always got this multimeter on anyway. And up here I kind of aim for like -6-ish, -7 or even -5. Saying that because literally as I'm working, this is what I do. So I'd probably put this on while I'm working and then at the end like really tweak it. But for the sake of this, what I'm also going to do is add in Clip Max by Rob Chokehold. And this is basically like I'm clipping instead of limiting. So I'm going to turn the limiter off while I do this. And I'm going to crank the gain as much as I can without it distorting, really. Because clipping keeps your transients in. It doesn't, limiting like squashes your drums and like makes them sound, even if it's a subtle thing, it kind of squashes all the things that are supposed to poke through your mix. And in my opinion, something that's really nice about a good mix down is having your transients poke through and like it just makes something sound much tighter in my opinion. So this is more of a preference thing. You don't have to do this. So let's turn the limiter off and crank the gain. don't think we need as much from the PSP if this is working. We'll go in with the limiter at the end. Basically, I'm going to crank it up until it starts distorting and then start bringing it down. Also, when you start to master, you'll start to hear things in your mix poke through that are too loud and too prominent. Like I can hear right here that this hi-hat's way too loud and it's actually got a bit of low end in it. Cool. I mean, I'm literally doing this on my headphones right now at like max volume and I can't turn it down because I'm recording on OBS. But I think that that's not distorting. So you guys tell me. So yeah, that's kind of my mastering process, and then like as I said, I'll go in and I'll tweak things afterwards. And because this is a new project, I don't really have anything else on the master that's kind of doing automation. But if I am adding like an endless smile or an EQ or some gain automation or even like stereo information automation, that all goes before the mastering chain. Like everything goes before the mastering chain, because that counts to me as like part of the production. And you know, it really, really matters on the order that you add these sort of plugins. So like if the OTT is after the limiter, you know, this is going to happen. You're going to clip straight away. You know, the limiter has to be the last thing. And all of this stuff, like, you guys asked for it, so I'm going to explain it. But I don't really know what I'm doing when it comes to mastering. I just do what I think sounds right. And I think everyone has their own way of doing it. As long as it sounds good, that's all that matters. So there you go. Okay, so let's move on to one of the other questions, which I thought was a really good question, actually. How do I kind of combine live instruments with electronic like synths and stuff? So in this track, I've just opened up a session from the summer, which was kind of meant for another artist, but I'll show you how I'm using like a lot of guitar in this project, combined with synths and like acoustic guitar as well. Let's dive into it. So in the verses, pretty much focuses around this guitar here. So here, as you can see, it sounds like one guitar line, but it's just a bunch of layers because I can't really play guitar to a level that I'm happy to completely record at. When I'm recording in guitars, like this sort of pattern, I always record like the bass and the melody separately. So I've double tracked the bass and then also the slides as well, just so everything was as tight as possible. And then the melody exactly the same on top, both double tracked with the slides and all chopped up, so there's no weird like noise poking through the gaps or anything like that. And you get this. And then basically each individual one of these tracks has Guitar Rig on, and Guitar Rig for me is like the best plugin for electric guitar processing. If anybody can help me with this, like, be a blessing, so tell me in the comments. But if you add Guitar Rig to a bus, so instead of adding it to each individual track, if I just add it to the bus, it goes mono, and I don't know why. I've tried like 100 different things, I don't know why it does it. So that's why I add it to each individual track. And then once I've done that, so it's just running through Guitar Rig, and then going into the bus, this is where I'm mixing the guitar. And I'm using this glue compressor again, a little bit of OTT, and then CLA, which is great for guitar. This is it without CLA. It sounds so soft and like dull. CLA just elevates it, gives it a lot more high-end presence, a bit of compression again. if you listen to this with the synth chords that come in here, if I take off this processing, it just gets lost in the mix. So a lot of the time I'm playing like the synths in the background while I'm doing this. And then we go into the chorus. I got this vibe of like 2012 pop music, of like everything that like Dr. Luke and like Circuit were producing, which was all like layered with guitars. It creates this like huge wall of sound basically. And that's when I straight up recorded in the acoustic guitar. Now, when I'm recording acoustic guitar, I'll either play it myself or my housemate Louis will play it. In this case, I think I played this in and I just chopped up the chords. And we record it in with a mic, like always. It sounds much brighter and you get all of the string noise and stuff in there, which is cool. So I'm just double tracking that. I always double track acoustic guitar. It sounds really nice. So with the synth, you get this. And processing wise, basically nothing going on here other than sidechain and then an EQ, just getting rid of that low end and the low mids that the synths are covering. I layered in the electric guitar, which sounds like this. So again, I would have played in the same chords as I did on the acoustic guitar, but on the electric guitar. And then in this case, I also added this top layer. This one's just been spread and I'm tuning it so that it's like perfectly in tune because it's just one note. So those together sound like this. So here's the chain for this one, which is a bit more complicated. So first of all, just getting rid of the low end because that specific guitar just does have a lot of low end in it. And then I'm sending that into a compressor because once the low end's been taken out, we don't want to be sending that low end into the compressor necessarily. It helps it sit with the synths more naturally rather than it getting lost in the mix. You want it to be competing with the synths, you know. And then we're going into CLA, which is just using an electric guitar preset, and I would have just modified it. OTT again, like I was saying earlier, on the electric guitar adds that nice bite. Bit crushing it just so it has more like high frequency information. You'll hear like the low body of this guitar in the mix with the synths, but say if you're listening on like laptop speakers or a phone or whatever, it can get lost. So the bit crusher just adds that nice information. Sidechain, again, all using the same sidechain so that it all sounds as one. And I'm using this Trans X wide, which is really good for like adding attack to more natural sounds like vocals and guitars and stuff like that. There's also this plucky guitar as well, which is super compressed. And this is, I am actually using a transient shaper on this. With the synths as well and the bass, you get this. So that's kind of how I go about mixing like live acoustic and electric instruments with synthesizers and in the box stuff. So now we're going to stay in the same project and I'm going to kind of run through how I kind of mix and just a lot of the tips that I would give to get like a clean, like punchy, nice mix down. The kind of process that I go through when I'm mixing is not one of sitting down after I've finished a track and mixing it, which is an absolutely fine way of doing it. It's just not the way that I do it. I never really knew what the term mixing meant. I just kind of produced and naturally mixed as I went along because I was never happy with continuing producing a track if it didn't sound good at that moment in time. So that's like a tip that I would give. You don't have to take it, but I tend to like mix as I go along. This is like a bus or a group of all of the drop synths together. So each of these drop synths has like a little bit of OTT on them just to help them poke through the mix and be the main element. But the kind of main advice I give when people ask me about mixing is to make sure that there's absolutely nothing occupying frequencies that it shouldn't be occupying. So like these synths, there's absolutely no need for them to be occupying anything below 100 hertz, because that's what our bass is covering. So why would we have it in there? And if you kind of think in the way that, oh yeah, it doesn't matter, I can't really hear a difference. After you've added in a ton of sounds and the track starts to build up in layers, you'll 100% start to hear like muddiness, and that's because all of that low frequency information just builds up. And that's why I'm always EQing, pretty much got an EQ on every sound in any track that's got this low cut on it. And if you just get into the habit of doing that, like this is just a habit to me now, it's like second nature, just adding in a low cut, and then I'm always making sure that that low cut is one of the last things in the chain. So I'm making sure that I'm adding the low cut here because I don't want to send any low frequency information into another plugin that might be compressing or something, because that can like confuse the compressor in some instances or whatnot. So that's why I have multiple low cuts. When, you know, you might say, why have you not just got one EQ at the end, low cut and it all? Like, you could do that, but it could change the overall sound, and that allows us to then add in like a huge bass like this. And again here, like this bass is still separated into two sounds. You've got the huge sub here, which it's being compressed by Camel Crusher just so it's nice and squashed and consistent. This is basically got extra harmonics in this bass because it's not just a sine wave. Because what I've found over the years is you kind of cut 100 hertz out of your bass, and then you add in your sub bass, which is a sine wave, and it just sounds a little bit empty in the middle. And that's what this extra harmonics kind of give you that back. So that's a little tip. You can kind of go in here and edit it and add in extra harmonics here. That's one way of doing it. Or you can just add a saturation or a distortion. And then we have the bass, which is again being low cut. And together they work together. And this bass is always in mono. Sub bass is always in mono. Pretty much everything below 100 hertz is in mono. The main kind of reason is on sound systems, especially if this has been played in a club, that power and like the depth of your sub will just disappear if it's wide. So that's always in mono. And then that allows you to widen up your mid bass so that in headphones it sounds bigger and whatever, because the sub bass is already in mono, so we don't have to change that. I'm adding width here by unison and detuning the sounds. So that's one way of like gaining width in your mix. But there are different ways that you can add stereo width to your mix. And when you kind of use different techniques on different sounds, you get an overall like just wider, fuller mix, as opposed to you adding like the Haas effect on everything. Then everything will just sound like it's in the same space. And when it comes to drums, like in this case, this is the drums. Trusty Oliver samples never get old. But a little technique in here that I use is, I wouldn't really call this a mixing technique, but it definitely contributes to like the overall mix. And that's like, we've got a kick here, and then this kind of like wide snare, and then this big fat snare, and then the claps. And that sounds great on its own, like, but in the mix that snare might be getting lost, or you might feel like the punch is being lost, like why is that snare not poking through? One technique you can use is to kind of add like a really short transient right before the kick hits. So in this case this is a clap, but it's hitting right before the kick hits, and that gives the illusion that your snare is like slapping really hard, like it sounds like it's compressed. Especially in the mix you'll hear that. And another way you can do this is by like going into your snare. If there's a bit of sound coming in before the snare, which there is here, and I've actually just literally done the technique here, is to kind of chop that a little bit, give a little bit of a gap there, and then I'm increasing the gain of that specific transient, and that just helps things fit in the mix better. Like it allows you to kind of basically just add a lot more punch to your drums. I think the main overall tip I give to anyone that's kind of stuck on their mixing is before you do anything, the two like main things I always make sure are going on before I think about anything else is that the low end is gone, and second of all that the levels are right. And that's like the most crucial thing, is making sure that the volumes of stuff are right. That's something that gets overlooked a lot. People are like, oh, I need to add compression to this, I need to add like a flipping, I don't know, decapitator 3005 to this bass to make it louder, or you could just turn it up, or you could turn something else down to let that bass poke through. I think once you get that right, then you can go in and think, okay, there's definitely still not enough like punch on the drums, or the bass is completely lost. Why is there no mid-range? You know, then you can go in and think about all the other stuff you can do and tackle those issues. But nail down the basics of the mix first is my main advice. So I hope that was really helpful for you guys, kind of running through all of your questions, and it was super fun to do. I hope you guys learned something from it as well. And of course, literally, if you guys have any more questions and you want to do this again, like we can do another answering your production questions round 2, let me know in the comments, and I'll definitely be interested in that, or any other video ideas. As usual, just let me know. Happy producing, stay safe, because the virus is still out there. Big love, and new music soon.